One of the issues that bothers me is that of alcohol-related violent crime in the Southwest. Our figures, not particularly good. One reason for this is the virtual doubling of the population with holidaymakers in the summer. Some of the alcohol-related crime is also greater in areas of social deprivation, and some of this is campus and student-related. One of the many strategies I will adopt is to target areas which have been hotspots for violent or alcohol-related crime, and to enforce zero-tolerance policing in those areas for short periods of time. Zero tolerance is a policy whereby the police do not let anything go, however small the incident. Of course, individual police constables have total freedom to make their own judgments, but we are talking about an overall strategy here. I think zero tolerance can work and can improve conditions locally, but only if combined with restorative justice delivered at street level. What I'm talking about here is the use of our charitable budget. The charitable budget available to the Police and Crime Commissioner is actually quite considerable. The use of our charitable budget to establish a program in cooperation with voluntary organizations so that there is a choice between arrest and prosecution on the one hand and agreeing to undertake voluntary work in place of arrest on the other. This can work. Indeed, it did work very effectively, however briefly, in the small town of Brixham in the southwest, where we had the so-called Brixham Community Payback scheme until the funds ran out to deliver it. That scheme was introduced, which gave those apprehended exactly that choice between community service and prosecution. Now, it's a choice that's delivered at street level by the police officers concerned. So there you have it, zero tolerance combined with community payback. I think this can and will improve the situation on the streets of the Southwest, and it's a policy I intend to introduce. The discussion which follows is with Charlie Bennett, a man who served with our armed forces in Afghanistan and Iraq, but whose personal background is in policing, and I think you will find it interesting. So Charles, well, thank you for joining me, Charles Bennett, to talk about police issues. And you served with the military in Afghanistan, Iraq, and you're a friend of mine, but more importantly in this context, in Zimbabwe, you were actually engaged in the police force, and more recently in Northern Ireland, you were working, although from a military perspective, you're working with the police force. So you have a policing background. And I wanted to ask you about one particular issue, and that was the concept of zero tolerance policing. I'm very attracted by the system that was experimented with in New York.
Indeed.
With some success, people say. I mean, I'm no expert on these issues, but with some success. The idea was that you would prosecute small crimes and not turn a blind eye to small issues of criminal justice. And by doing so, you made big crimes less prevalent. I mean, it's not a thing, I guess, that you did in Zimbabwe or Northern Ireland, but the concept, is it one that interests you? Do you see it as possible?
I think in many senses it's effective. It was shown to be effective in New York, but it's of course it's only one side of the coin. Now in Zimbabwe, though, a lot of my police service was in fact paramilitary, and we were a rather unique semi-colonial police force. We were still trained in the basic essence of British policing, and British policing and other police services and forces that follow its guidelines and traditions is rather different to police forces which are rather military and perhaps traditionally oppressive in concept. The whole basis of British policing has been that each individual police officer holds the office of constable, and that's not simply a piece of arcane writing. It is that though you may at times, as certainly in Zimbabwe and in most colonial police forces we were, very militarized and under military discipline, that in terms of exercising your power as a police officer, it was up to you as an individual, whether you were a lowly constable or equivalent, or right up to being a chief constable or commissioner, that in spite of any discipline, it was up to you to make intelligent distinctions and decisions on the basis of your own initiative and understanding of the situation. And this isn't in conflict with zero tolerance at all. And I think they can complement each other. But I fear what we've seen too often in this country in recent years is increasing bureaucratization of police forces.
Interesting.
And a lack of resources and very thinly spread manpower have actually made individual police officers less effective because of the way they're deployed and under the demands on their time. And you can no more have zero tolerance if you don't have a sufficient number of police officers within the community, and nor can you have an intelligent and sensitive application of police authority unless you have community links and a reasonably subtle and sensitive understanding of the people and communities you're dealing with. So zero tolerance in itself certainly won't solve everything, even if it'll solve anything. So it's not a panacea. It's also difficult to see how this can effectively be applied in this country with fewer and fewer police on the ground, and many crimes being reported by the public simply being registered for information without any effective response at all. So attractive though the idea of zero tolerance is, and it has many virtues, it is in conflict with the police becoming sadly increasingly detached from the populations that they serve, and also under, one can only say, political pressure not to investigate crimes. You can't have zero tolerance if you don't treat burglary as a crime worthy of a police officer attending the scene of the crime.
Yes, but I fully see that, and I'm all too aware of the terrible pressure the police are under with these cuts. But what about the idea, which was the one I kind of backed, the idea of targeted zero tolerance, where you took an area that perhaps was a problem, and for a period of time treated that small area, that small, perhaps a specific town, and you singled that town out where there had been problem with rising crime or whatever, and dealt with it on a zero tolerance way for a limited period of time, and then took the heavy hand away, and so that you would actually perhaps shape things up in some way. Can you see that as a...
I certainly can, but with the caveat that even in those circumstances where you're concentrating on an area with significant and outstanding criminal problems, you must never take away, as has all too often been taken away in modern times, the independence of discretion of individual police officers. Well, and that I think is a distinction worth making. You must never have the case where the law is not just applied fairly, but is applied indiscriminately.
What I had in mind was a kind of a situation where you had street-level restorative justice in combination with zero tolerance, so that and in the case of the police commissioners, they have control over a huge charitable budget, as well as the policing budget. Quite separate from the policing budget, there is a charitable budget which is in their pocket to disperse basically at their whim, which is extraordinary power to have because it's a multi-million-pound budget. What I had in mind was the concept where you would let's take it's been practiced in Brixham briefly. There was a period in which at street level in the small town of Brixham there was an experiment in street level restorative justice whereby the police officer would say to the kid, okay, or whoever, okay, look, you've been misbehaving, this is a crime, I can arrest you for this, or you can agree here and now that you will take, at my behest, a period of community work that you're going to do with this charity up the street, rather than have a record. And that was delivered in Brixham at street level. It was a brief experiment, but I thought very effective. And so combining street level, I'm calling it restorative justice, not restorative justice in the traditional way, but nonetheless street level restorative justice with this kind of approach, I thought it might work in a way. Targeted zero tolerance policing.
I think that sounds an excellent idea, but I think the important thing is having this carried out at an effective and therefore low level, and as you say, involving local police officers. And of course, to do that, you have to have local police officers to be involved.
Yes,
which is a key part of the solution.
The equation.
But certainly, yes, in that, and of course, that goes back to many people's sometimes perhaps rather rose-tinted, nostalgic view of local, particularly rural, village bobby policing. That a lot of things were dealt with informally by police officers who had the authority, both formal and informal, to do an awful lot more if they needed to, but didn't, and that can be used to very good effect, certainly without clogging up the court system and massive bureaucracy, and sometimes unnecessary damaging effect on people's subsequent lives in the case of a lot of youthful misbehaviour. But I think it has to be at that level that you described to be effective. Once you have formal and bureaucratic restorative justice schemes involving guidelines and committees and bodies and large budgets and offices, I think they rather lose their effect, because you have to know the individual concerned to make an effective decision about whether this can really be done with any genuine effect, or whether you're just letting him get away with it. And that is where individual community contact is so important. And though I've never been involved in police work in Britain, or even in any developed society, that is something that we have been losing, and it destroys the confidence of the public in the police the more impersonal and distant the police become. And that it's not easy to see how, under current budgetary constraints, anyone is going to get back to such a supposedly idyllic situation. But I think that's the only effective way. And all too often now, in their dress and appearance and tactical deployment, police appear like mechanised paramilitary militiamen dressed in black and looking as though they're looking for a fight. And not by their own choice, and often, sadly, of course, it's necessary. But I think, though there's a lot of talk of community policing, a lot of recent policy developments have been completely contradictory of that. And it's something that I think in Britain we were rightly proud of, and a lot of other countries envied the British policing system and indeed tried to copy it. And it's something I think somehow or other we need to keep a grip of, or with the best will in the world, we can't achieve anything, even in terms of such very sensible schemes as you describe.
Well, Charles, thank you. That's really very helpful indeed. Bless your heart. Many thanks
Not at all.
Those words. Thank you.